All right, welcome to the Code Review Weekly for March 22nd. Andre, you've got the first one up, so yeah, take it away.
Sure, I'll take it. Thanks, Kai. So I wanted to bring this topic up here for discussion, essentially because, when we picked it up, there was a bunch of discussions happening in there, and I couldn't distill it properly. It's essentially something that is happening when we're creating diff nodes on an MR, and we have the white space changes disabled. And what I missed was that in some situations, it throws an error, right? So it throws a 500, but not all of them. So there are still a lot of cases where the files are valid, or I guess the diffs are the same between white space and non-white space. So I guess those are fine. And others are failing indeed with 500. So the action there is to, as an interim solution, is to mitigate the errors, which I understand. It's kind of like prevent the failures by disabling the comments. But in essence, we would be removing the ability that they currently have to successfully comment on some files. That's the transience aspect to this bug. Is that correct? Is that my understanding? Correct?
Yes, I think yes, in some cases with that setting on, we don't have the data to make a comment. In some cases, it will work depending on what the difference of the white space changes are and how it regenerates the diff, and not in all cases. And then I think the related issue is that in other cases, you also can generate a 422 error when you're hiding white space changes as well. So sometimes they can't necessarily, like, sometimes it's a 500, it's an outright failure. Sometimes it's a 422. And then there's a smaller case where, like, I guess it's successful.
Okay, thanks. So I totally understand that there's it's the definition of a transient error, right? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But in this time, we do have some knowledge on what are the situations where it's causing. Now, where we're starting to have a difficulty to understand, not to understand, but it feels like we're after assigning this and discussing this with Phil and the whys and what we're doing here. It does feel like we're trying to ship something as an interim that could, well, I wouldn't say delay, but essentially it's going to take us longer, or it's going to take a while to get the solution sorted. So why not start right away, try to find a solution instead of like removing the ability of them commenting on certain valid scenarios. So I don't know exactly what the proportion is, and that depends on the MR. Like for some users who have that option disabled, the show white space changes, they might not ever trip this because the files are the same. Phil shared a Periscope dashboard. I don't know if I'm not going to share it. I don't know if we should put it in the recording. I put it in the agenda. But just that this would affect a lot of users, right? These are the users that have that white space changes in hidden, yeah, right. So it feels that this would affect a lot of people, and our concern here is that we'll be limiting the experience a lot for those users where they might not even all be affected by the bug. So trying to one is, could we find a better mitigation where we're like detecting that this will have a problem and not losing the data, because that data loss is a problem, or eventually start using that capacity we would do to do this, to start discussing a solution for backend and front end to kind of like come up with an actual solution. So my call out here is to try to rethink the scheduling of this and potentially replacing it with either softer mitigation or essentially just finding a solution for the problem at hand. That's the point of this agenda item. Any thoughts on that?
Um, yeah, I get the concern. I think the problem is when backend looked into this, they don't have an answer. Like they don't like in terms of like um
Fair.
like starting work. We don't have an answer for it because the diffs um the problem is that the diffs are like fundamentally different, right? Like white space isn't a cosmetic change. It is actually a different diff. And so we don't have matching data in all those scenarios to deal with like how comments display. And that's where this like falls apart, right? Like if we say it's this line and this line for this diff, and then I view an MR in a different way, then I don't have that comment anymore because we don't know where that went.
On the changes tab, right? But on the overview, they should always be available, right? I understand that it's
um,
not an optimal UX. I'm not excusing that. I'm just
yeah,
asking.
I
I
actually
understand
don't
it's
know if on
actually
the
visible.
overview, I assume if you were able to successfully make a comment, then in theory, yes, it would show on the overview tab, but we don't have data to even successfully make those comments with the way the models like anticipate what they're getting back, right? Like I think commenting is and you'd really need to ask Mark, like he would be the better person. But in my um I think because comment data contains um old line and new line positions and old line and new line positions for like all of the SHAs, like it's multiple like parameters, right? I think it's like 4 or 5 things that actually go into positioning a comment. I don't know that we technically
Yeah.
we even have those things. So like I think that's where this like doesn't work. I agree that like we need to fix it. Without a plan though, the risk is that we leave users in a unhappy state for longer, right? Like the right now we know that we get fairly regular reports of users hitting the 500 error, right? Like it's pretty regular there. Lots of customers, right? It's definitely
Yeah.
increased recently, but it's frequent enough that like this is a problem. And then you compound that with like the 422 error, which is also fairly frequent, and I think also related to white space changes, if I'm not mistaken. That I think from my side, it makes
Yeah.
sense to
Yeah.
protect users here versus the 500, right? Because the 500 swallows. That's the other sort of problem. I think the 422 post what
Data
it
loss.
can,
Yeah.
and yeah, the 500 just like eat your comments, like they're gone.
Okay.
Uh,
So here's what I propose. I proposed using this issue as sort of a spike, um, with the end goal of shipping a mitigation for the data loss, but leave it open instead of being something like disable comments. That's the expected outcome. I'm going to let Phil poke around and join with Mark and investigate the code just a little bit, because there's a couple of things here. If we can find a way that when you post a comment to a diff file with a line hash that is not understandable, if that's the case where it's throwing the 500 and we start accepting those comments but displaying them at you know the top of the file and no line in particular or something, that could be if that's implementable in the same within a milestone, we can have the same mitigation with an actual solution. If we don't do that, but we start a mitigation where the 500 happens but does not eat up the comment or the batch comments, it's also mitigation. We want to avoid the data loss for sure. But I would like us to try at least going into this without a closed solution right away, because it feels. I think we don't understand that it's a drastic measure, but instead of going in there with that assumption that we're disabling comments for everybody that has that option disabled, I'm going to poke around a little bit. We might end up getting the milestone, compromising and having to ship the same thing. I hope we don't. I hope we find something else. But it doesn't. Do you have a problem with that, Kai? Like poking around the code base trying to find other ways to get around this?
I don't, other than Jay and Mark have spent like the time. I guess that's like the question. Like, I think like what you mentioned about potentially like, oh, maybe we like attach the comment and just show it not like in the file or at the bottom of the file. Like, I'm not sure like UX would love that. I also don't know about saving them from the 500, right? I think the risk of saving you from the 500 and retaining your data is that what do you do? Right? Like the different, when we saved, like we did this with search, right? Like where we now rescue the 500 and like say, hey, you just need to do something different. Like the problem here is like, if you leave a comment and I'm like, you need to do something else to get this done. You can't, because like as soon as you change your diff mode, we're going to reload diffs and all your comments are gone. Right? Like there's no happy escape path.
Kind of. And here's what I'm thinking. You know, I have that experience with tools that import photos from your phone to your computer. It's normal for some photos to fail the transfer, but they're still in the phone. Essentially, instead of assuming that the batch comments or the publishing level comment is like success or failure, it could be something like, oh, your review was posted. 43 comments were successful, 2 failed, but they're still in draft mode. We didn't delete them as drafts. Now, I understand that that's much more easier said than done. But I feel like there's potentially some easy ways to rescue them from a potential failure on a 500 if we're prepared for that. Because, for example, what I'm thinking exactly on the front end is in the context that we do the publishing of a comment, there's a moment that we clear the local cache or the local storage of the draft comment you have not published yet. So there's a moment that we clear that once we get the success. So we can ensure that we get a success before we clear that cache when you're publishing a comment. So yeah, basically, I don't think we will find a solution here on the call. Essentially, what I'm asking here is just we're going to take a little longer looking around and see if we can find alternatives, and we'll discuss it. Of course, with UX and Ukai. It just feels off going in there. Again, I don't want to discard the work already done by Jay. You're right. Like they already poked around, they were trying to find a solution, and Matt and Mark, they already looked at it for sure. So yeah, it just feels a little bit. Well, I'll be transparent and say that Phil wasn't particularly excited, or at least willing to disable the comments right away.
Yeah, I mean,
that might be that he needs to poke around.
I don't love it either. If we have a better solution, fine. I'd say my concern with spending time investigating right now is that we're already like somewhat capacity constrained, right? Like we didn't build in capacity for this, and like in particular, Phil has other things going on this milestone.
I'm checking to see how much trapable capacity is, but yeah, you're right. It is might come at a cost of something else. That's true. Let's see. Oh, he has the beautifying UI.
Yeah, right. So there's and like we've changed the safe replies thing, and like that has brought on work that wasn't necessarily anticipated, right? So my concern is like, yeah, where's the capacity to investigate this? Like if we can time box it to like spend a day, if you can't find anything easy, great. If not, then like, And if the concern is like, the other option, right, is put this in with a feature flag, turn the feature flag on SaaS, don't enable it by default, and like let's wait and see like how problematic, and like maybe we can turn it off gradually or something, right? Like that gives us a way to back out of it without needing to like unwind it completely if we're that risk concerned about it. I think ultimately like we've got to
So that's
figure out
definitely the way to go. Yeah.
comments, right? Like
Sorry.
I said, ultimately, like I think we all agree that there is something fundamentally wrong in the underlying like comment piece here that like is creating all of these challenges between different diffs and versions and all of these things, and like we need to figure out how we do that. But I tend to believe that that's probably a much larger effort than anything we could do today. I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah. Uh, I think that works for me, and I think we'll take a look to see if we can come up with any other alternatives, and then we'll keep chatting about this. But if we do this, we'll always be behind the feature flag so we can control it first. In case we have a riot on the streets, we can react much quicker. Right. I think that's all I have for this point. So thanks, Kai. Amy, you have the next point.
Yeah, I want to make sure that we don't get surprised like we did the last time we tried to do this. If you check that merge request, you will recognize the thing that got rolled out briefly last milestone, where we renamed merge when pipeline succeeds. So, oh yeah, that thing that we only use in a couple of places. This is going to have some docs impact for me. I don't know how involved code review is with this. And that's partly what I'm fishing for here. Do we at least know it exists?
Yeah, this is all our idea and design that we gave to Verify to go validate and deal with.
Okay.
As part of a larger concept that is legitimately auto merge that code review wants to do, but this was a that needed to be solved first.
Okay. All right. That's going to, like I said, it'll have docs ramifications for me. I've left a note about it in the planning issue, and I am satisfied the people who are here know that it's coming. Cool. Surprises suck.
I'll circulate along the team as well.
And from a UX side, Pedro has been involved in like the refinement of like the last minute changes to designs that we're making. So
okay,
if there are questions there, then I think Pedro is, I guess, technically the UX DRI here, because I don't think Vithika is on pipeline execution anymore. So I think a lot of this belongs to Pedro too.
All right. The best thing that I could ask from Kai and Andre would be to back me up a little bit here and make sure they don't surprise merge this on me again, so that we can at least have docs ready in tandem. That'd be cool.
Yeah, it should be merging. One of the requirements this time is a feature flag, so it shouldn't turn on globally again like it did last time. So we should be able to like get the code landed and then deal with like what needs to happen and know that there's a feature flag. So yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thank you for that. All right. Anything after me?
All right, I'm gonna hit end.